The mortgage documents landed on my kitchen table with a thud that seemed to echo through my entire 68 years of life. My son Brad stood there, his wife Jessica beside him, both wearing expressions of entitlement I'd never seen before. "Dad, we bought Jessica a house," Brad announced. $650,000. It's in her name for tax purposes. Jessica pushed the papers toward me. "You've saved enough money, Ron. It's time to help your family." The words hit me like ice water. They hadn't bought a house and needed help. They'd bought a house and expected me to pay for it. The next evening, my modest living room felt smaller than ever. I'd asked my daughter Emma to come over, hoping she might help her brother see reason. Instead, Brad arrived with Jessica, and to my complete surprise, her parents, Harold and Patricia Whitman. What should have been a private family discussion had transformed into something else entirely. Harold Whitman made himself comfortable in my recliner, the one where Martha used to sit before cancer took her 5 years ago. He was a tall man, with gray hair slicked back and a salesman's smile that never quite reached his eyes. Patricia perched on my sofa's edge, her designer handbag placed precisely on her lap. Everything about them screamed calculated presentation. "Ron." Harold began, his voice carrying the false warmth of someone who'd spent years perfecting the art of manipulation. In successful families, wealth flows naturally between generations. When Patricia's father passed, he made sure we were taken care of. That's what real fathers do. I felt my jaw tighten. This man, whom I'd met perhaps 6 times in the 4 years since Brad married Jessica, was lecturing me about fatherhood in my own home. Emma shifted uncomfortably beside me, her hand briefly touching my arm in silent support. Jessica leaned forward, then her perfectly manicured nails drumming against her knee. "There's something else you should know, Ron. I'm pregnant, 3 months along." She paused, letting the words settle like hooks in the air. "Your grandchild deserves a proper home, don't you think? Unless, of course, you don't care about being part of his life." The threat hung there naked and ugly. Emma's intake of breath was sharp beside me, but I kept my face neutral. 68 years of life had taught me when to speak and when to observe, and every instinct screamed that something was deeply wrong here. Patricia pulled out a manila folder from her handbag. "We've had Jessica's cousin draw this up. It's simply a formalization of what you've already promised." She slid papers across my coffee table. "Bradley told us about your conversations about how you said you'd always take care of them." "I never said I'd buy them a house." I replied, my voice steady, despite the anger building in my chest. "Especially not one solely in Jessica's name." Brad, who had been uncharacteristically silent, finally spoke. "Dad, you told me family comes first. You said that at Mom's funeral. Everyone heard it." The invocation of Martha's memory in this context felt like a violation. Yes, I'd spoken about family at my wife's funeral. I'd talked about love support and being there for each other. I hadn't pledged my life savings to fund extravagant purchases. Emma found her voice. "Brad, this is insane. Dad worked his whole life for his retirement. He built Peterson Construction from nothing. He's not a bank." Jessica's eyes flashed toward my daughter. "Maybe if you weren't so jealous of Brad finally having something nice, you'd understand family loyalty." She turned back to me, her expression shifting to wounded disappointment. "We're not asking for charity, Ron. We're asking you to invest in your grandchild's future." I noticed something then that made my blood run cold. Jessica kept glancing at her phone, positioned face up on the arm of the couch. The screen was black, but the camera lens pointed directly at me. My years in construction had taught me to spot when someone was trying to pull one over. Without changing my expression, I reached into my pocket and quietly activated my own phone's recording app. Harold stood up, smoothing his khakis with practiced motion. "Look, Ron, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. Jessica deserves security. She's carrying a Peterson heir. Surely that's worth a simple signature on some papers. The papers that would obligate me to pay $7,000 a month for 30 years? I kept my voice calm, though inside I was seething. For a house I've never seen that my name isn't on for a mortgage I didn't agree to. Patricia's perfectly painted lips pursed. Martha would be ashamed of your selfishness. She understood what family meant. The room went silent. Even Brad seemed to realize his mother-in-law had crossed a line. Emma stood up, her face flushed with anger. How dare you invoke my mother's name? You didn't even come to her funeral. We were traveling, Patricia replied smoothly, though I caught the quick glance she exchanged with Harold. But we know what kind of woman she was. Generous, giving. Everything you're not being right now, Ron. I stood slowly, my knees protesting after sitting too long. This meeting is over. Brad, when you want to have an actual conversation without the ambush squad, you know where to find me. Jessica grabbed her phone, and I noticed her fumbling to stop something on the screen. This isn't over, Ron. We've tried being nice. Remember that when things get ugly. Harold collected the papers Patricia had brought, his movements sharp with irritation. You're making a mistake, Peterson. We offered you the chance to do this with dignity. As they filed out, Brad lingered at the door. For a moment, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Doubt, regret. But Jessica's hand on his arm pulled him away before he could speak. Emma and I stood in my living room, the silence heavy between us. Finally, she spoke. Dad, something's really wrong here. This isn't like Brad. I nodded, my mind already working through what I'd witnessed. The recording on Jessica's phone, the prepared documents, the coordinated attack, the threat about my grandchild. This wasn't a family asking for help. This was something else entirely. Emma, I said quietly, I need you to remember everything that was said tonight. Write it down when you get home. Every word. She looked at me with concern. You think they're planning something? I thought about Jessica's final words about things getting ugly. I know they are. That night, I sat in Martha's chair looking at our wedding photo on the mantel. We'd built everything together, saved every penny, made sacrifices so our children would have better lives. But somewhere along the way, I'd failed to teach Brad the difference between support and entitlement. The next morning would bring consequences I couldn't yet imagine. But one thing was certain, I wouldn't be signing any papers. And if they wanted ugly, they'd learn that Ron Peterson hadn't built a successful construction company by rolling over when someone tried to bulldoze him. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts, stopping at a name I hadn't called in years. David Fitzgerald, the best lawyer in 3 counties, and an old friend from my Navy days. Something told me I was going to need him. 2 weeks of silence had given me false hope. I'd thrown myself into my workshop restoring an antique dresser Martha had bought at an estate sale years ago. The rhythmic motion of sanding helped quiet my mind, but it couldn't erase the image of Brad's face that night, twisted with an entitlement I'd never seen before. The process server found me in my driveway on a Thursday morning. He was a young man, apologetic, as he handed me the thick envelope. Ronald Peterson. You've been served. My hands remained steady as I signed for the papers, though my heart accelerated. I'd been expecting something, but the reality of holding legal documents with my son's name as plaintiff felt surreal. I waited until the process server's car disappeared around the corner before opening the envelope. The lawsuit demanded $800,000. My eyes scanned the allegations: breach of verbal contract, intentional infliction of emotional distress, failure to fulfill parental obligations, and something called promissory estoppel. The amount included the house value claim, damages for Jessica's high-risk pregnancy due to my alleged stress-inducing behavior, and future therapy costs for their unborn child. I drove directly to David Fitzgerald's office, the papers burning like a brand on my passenger seat. David's secretary, Helen, took one look at my face and ushered me straight through. David hadn't changed much in the 5 years since Martha's estate settlement. His hair was whiter, perhaps, but his eyes remained sharp as a hawk's. He read through the lawsuit while I sat in his leather chair, watching his expression grow increasingly grim. Ron, he said, finally setting the papers down with deliberate care, This is one of the most vindictive family lawsuits I've seen. And I've been doing this for 37 years. He leaned back, steeping his fingers. First things first. Tell me everything. Don't leave out a single detail. I recounted the evening 2 weeks prior, grateful I'd recorded the latter portion of the conversation. David's expression grew thoughtful as he listened to the playback on my phone. Smart thinking with the recording, he said. Illinois is a two-party consent state, but they were recording you first without notification. That actually works in our favor. He pulled out a legal pad, his pen moving in quick, precise strokes. Now, this supposed verbal contract Jessica's cousin drafted. Did you ever at any time promise to buy them a house? Never. I helped Brad with his student loans years ago, gave him $10,000 when he got married. But I've never promised property or ongoing support. I rubbed my temples, fighting off a growing headache. David, this doesn't feel like Brad. He's been different since marrying Jessica. But this level of aggression... David set down his pen. I've seen this pattern before. Spouse isolates the adult child, gradually turns them against the parent, then goes for the money. He pulled up something on his computer. Jessica's maiden name is Whitman. That's what she told us. And her parents are Harold and Patricia Whitman. Yes. His fingers flew across the keyboard. Interesting. I'm not finding much history for a Jessica Whitman beyond about 6 years ago. He made another note. Ron, I think we need a private investigator. Someone who specializes in background checks and financial fraud. I know just the person. He made a phone call, speaking briefly before hanging up. Margaret Stone, former FBI specialized in document analysis. She can meet with us tomorrow morning. What about Brad? The question hurt to ask. Is he liable for this too? David's expression softened slightly. He's named as plaintiff, so yes. But Ron, there's something odd about these mortgage documents they reference. They claim Brad signed them, but they're not attached as exhibits. That's unusual. Any competent lawyer would include such crucial evidence. So what do? We respond to the lawsuit, of course. But more importantly, we investigate. Something's not right here. He pulled out another form. I'm filing for discovery immediately. They'll have to produce all documents, including these mysterious mortgage papers. That night, sleep eluded me. I wandered through my house, seeing Brad everywhere. The growth marks on the kitchen door frame. The treehouse still standing in the backyard oak. Photos chronicling his journey from gap-toothed child to high school graduate to the man who'd stood in my living room making threats. The next morning, Margaret Stone arrived at David's office precisely at 9. She was in her 50s, with steel gray hair pulled back severely and eyes that seemed to catalog everything. Her handshake was firm, her manner direct. Mr. Peterson Davids filled me in on the basics. She opened a leather portfolio. I've already done some preliminary searches. Jessica Whitman has an interesting gap in her history. But what's more intriguing is what I found about Harold and Patricia Whitman. She slid a printout across the table. Harold's real estate license was suspended in Michigan 8 years ago for ethics violations. He relocated to Illinois shortly after. Patricia has been named in 3 civil suits over the past decade, all involving elderly relatives and disputed inheritances. My stomach turned. And they're targeting me now. It appears so. But here's where it gets interesting. She produced another document. Jessica's social media presence begins abruptly 6 years ago. Before that, nothing. That suggests a name change or a deliberate fresh start. David leaned forward. Can you dig deeper? Already on it. I have contacts in Michigan who can pull court records. She turned to me. Mr. Peterson, I need you to think. Has Jessica ever mentioned previous relationships, family in other states? Anything that might help me trace her actual history? I searched my memory. Brad mentioned once that she'd been engaged before, but Jessica shut down the conversation. Said the past didn't matter. Margaret made a note. Classic red flag. People with nothing to hide don't usually declare the past off limits. She closed her portfolio. Give me a week. I'll have answers. 3 days later, David called with news about the discovery process. They're stonewalling Ron. Their lawyer claims the mortgage documents are temporarily misplaced. He's asking for a 30-day extension. Can they do that? They can try, but it suggests they're buying time possibly to manufacture evidence. His voice carried warning. Ron, be very careful. Document everything. Don't meet with Brad alone. And if anyone approaches you with any kind of offer or threat, call me immediately. His warning proved prescient. That very evening, Harold Whitman appeared at my door. I saw him through the peephole and almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. I opened the door, but didn't invite him in. Ron, he said, his salesman smile in full force. I think we can resolve this between reasonable men. My lawyer advises against direct communication. His smile faltered slightly. Lawyers make everything complicated. This is simple. 200,000 cash, and everyone walks away happy. Jessica drops the lawsuit, you get to see your grandchild Brad, comes back into your life. Everyone wins. I kept my expression neutral while my mind raced. 200,000 to make it go away. This was starting to feel less like a family dispute, and more like extortion. I'll need to discuss any settlement with my attorney. Harold's friendly mask slipped entirely. You do that. But understand something, Peterson. I have connections you can't imagine. Judges, politicians, people who can make your golden years very unpleasant. He leaned closer, and I smelled expensive cologne mixed with something sour. Take the deal. It's the best you're going to get. After he left, I immediately called David and recounted the conversation. His response was swift. That's attempted extortion. Did you record it? No, he caught me off guard. From now on, record everything. Illinois law be damned, we'll sort out admissibility later. He paused. Ron, this is escalating beyond a family dispute. I'm going to bring in the state's attorney's office. This smells like organized fraud. A week later, Margaret Stone called with news that changed everything. Ron, David, you need to sit down for this. Her voice over the speakerphone was grimly satisfied. Jessica Whitman's real name is Jennifer Kowalski. She was married to a Carl Kowalski in Michigan. He's currently serving 7 years for wire fraud and money laundering. I felt the blood drain from my face. Brad had married a criminal's wife. It gets worse, Margaret continued. Jennifer was named as an unindicted co-conspirator. She apparently testified against Carl in exchange for immunity, then disappeared. She legally changed her name to Jessica Whitman 6 years ago and moved to Illinois. David was scribbling notes furiously. What was the nature of the fraud? They targeted elderly parents of their friends, convinced the adult children to pressure parents for money, then split the proceeds. Carl was the mastermind, but Jennifer was the one who identified targets and coached the adult children. I had to ask, though. I dreaded the answer. Does Brad know any of this? Unlikely. Jennifer's been very careful. New name, new state, new identity. She's even altered her appearance significantly. Blonde now, instead of brunette, different style entirely. Margaret's voice carried sympathy. Ron, your son's been targeted by a professional con artist. That night, I sat with a glass of Martha's favorite bourbon, trying to process everything. My son was married to a criminal. He was suing me for $800,000. His wife's family were con artists. And somewhere in this mess, there was supposedly a grandchild on the way. I thought about calling Brad, warning him. But David had been clear any contact could be construed as witness tampering, now that a lawsuit was active. I was trapped watching my son dig himself deeper into a hole he didn't even know existed. The antique dresser sat in my workshop half restored. I'd started it, hoping to give it to Brad and Jessica for their home. Now I wondered if I'd ever finish it. Some things, once broken, couldn't be restored with sandpaper and varnish. Trust was one of them. But I'd built Peterson Construction by never backing down from a fight. If Jessica Whitman, or Jennifer Kowalski, or whatever she called herself, thought she could bulldoze me, she was about to learn otherwise. I had truth on my side, good lawyers, and a determination forged over 68 years of hard living. The next morning, I gave David and Margaret the green light to dig deeper. Find everything, I told them. I want to know every detail of who my son married, because one way or another this ends with Brad knowing the truth. The war was just beginning, and I was playing the long game. Just like in construction, sometimes you had to tear down to the foundation before you could rebuild. And if that foundation was rotten, better to know now than after the whole structure collapsed. Margaret Stone's office occupied the third floor of a nondescript building downtown, the kind of place you'd walk past 100 times without noticing. That anonymity, she explained, was intentional. Her work required discretion, and in the 3 weeks since she'd taken my case, she'd been anything but idle. "Ron, what I'm about to show you isn't easy to see," she warned, gesturing to a wall covered in documents, photos, and connecting strings like something from a detective movie. "But you need to understand the full scope of what your son's involved in." David Fitzgerald sat beside me, his legal pad ready. We'd driven here together after Margaret called, saying she'd found something critical. The urgency in her voice had made my stomach clench. Margaret pointed to a bank statement. "Jessica's been moving money from Brad's accounts for 3 years. Small amounts at first, 50, here 100 there. Nothing that would trigger suspicion. But it's accelerated recently." She traced a finger down the columns. "In total, $47,000 has been transferred to an account under Patricia Whitman's name. Brad never mentioned money troubles. I said, though, even as the words left my mouth, I remembered him canceling plans recently, citing budget constraints. He probably doesn't know. The transfers are disguised as automatic bill payments, cable utilities insurance, but they all route to the same account." Margaret pulled out another document. "Here's where it gets interesting. That account shows regular cash withdrawals, always just under the reporting threshold." David looked up from his notes. "Classic structuring. They know what they're doing." "Oh, it gets better." Margaret's expression was grim. "Or worse, depending on your perspective." She pulled down a medical record. Jessica's pregnancy announcement was strategically timed. According to her actual medical records, which took some doing to legally obtain, she had an appointment with a fertility specialist 2 days before the family meeting at your house. Not an obstetrician. A fertility specialist. My heart sank. So she's not pregnant. I can't say definitively without violating medical privacy laws. But the timing is suspicious. Plus, look at this. She showed us a credit card statement. 3 weeks ago, Jessica purchased something from a company called Stagecraft Studios. They specialize in theatrical props and special effects for film. David's pen stopped moving. "You're not suggesting—" "A prosthetic pregnancy belly costs about $400. High-quality ones are virtually undetectable under clothing." Margaret's jaw tightened. "I've seen this scam before. Fake a pregnancy to manipulate emotions, and timelines claim miscarriage later due to stress from the legal battle." I felt sick. The idea that someone would fake carrying my grandchild was beyond comprehension. "We need proof. Solid proof." "Working on it." Margaret moved to another section of her wall. "Meanwhile, let's talk about Brad's behavior changes. Ron, you mentioned he seems different lately. Foggy, you said. Tired all the time. Less sharp than usual. I attributed it to work stress." She pulled out a photo from Brad's social media showing him and Jessica at a restaurant. "See the tea glass by his plate. Jessica tags these dinner photos religiously. Brad always has the same herbal tea, something Jessica makes specially for him. So, I had a contact run a standard drug panel on tea leaves from the same brand Jessica buys. By itself harmless. But I found receipts for supplements Jessica purchases monthly. Valerian root extremely concentrated. Melatonin prescription strength. Kava extract." She looked at me directly. "Individually, these are sleep aids. Combined in the right doses, they create a sedative effect. Mild disorientation, compliance, foggy memory." David's face had gone pale. "That's drugging someone without consent. That's a felony." "If we can prove it, yes." Margaret pulled out a small device. Ron, I need to give you this. It's a camera completely legal for you to place in your own home. If Brad visits and Jessica makes him tea, we need that footage. I took the device no bigger than a button. The idea of spying in my own home felt wrong, but the thought of my son being drugged felt worse. There's more. Margaret moved to the final section of her display. Carl Kowalski, Jessica's ex-husband. I visited him in federal prison yesterday. You what? David's voice cracked. Completely legal. He's allowed visitors, and he was very eager to talk once I mentioned Jessica's new last name. She pulled out a transcript. According to Carl, Jessica learned everything from her mother. Patricia's run this con in 3 states over 15 years. Always the same pattern. Find a lonely man with wealthy parents, isolate him from family, create financial pressure, then go after the parents' money. Carl said Jessica betrayed him to save herself. She was supposed to get 5 years, but she turned state's evidence, walked free, and disappeared with $200,000 in hidden assets the FBI never found. I stood up, unable to sit still any longer. We need to warn Brad. We can't, David reminded me. Not while the lawsuit's active. Any contact could be seen as witness tampering or attempting to influence a plaintiff. So I'm supposed to watch my son be destroyed by this woman? Margaret's expression softened. We're building a case, Ron. When we move, we'll have everything lined up. Jessica's not the only one who can play the long game. That evening, I installed the tiny camera in my living room, concealing it in a bookshelf ornament Martha had loved. The irony wasn't lost on me, using my late wife's keepsake to protect our son. 2 days later, Brad called, asking if he could stop by. His voice sounded sluggish, words slightly slurred. Jessica's out with her mom. Thought maybe we could talk. He arrived looking worse than I'd seen him. Dark circles under his eyes, clothes wrinkled, a tremor in his hands. But what alarmed me most was the thermos he carried. Jessica made me tea for the road, he explained, pouring a cup. Says it helps with my stress. I watched him drink it, my installed camera recording everything. Within 20 minutes, his speech slowed further. He kept losing his train of thought, apologizing repeatedly. Dad, I'm sorry about everything. He said, words thick. Jessica says you're being unreasonable, but sometimes I wonder. He trailed off, staring at nothing. Brad, how long have you been drinking that tea? He blinked slowly. Every night for 2 years, maybe more. Jessica says I have chronic insomnia. The tea's the only thing that helps. I wanted to shake him, tell him he was being poisoned. Instead, I carefully asked, have you seen a doctor about the insomnia? Jessica says doctors just push pills. Natural remedies are better. He yawned massively. I should go. Not safe to drive when I'm this tired. Stay here tonight, I urged. Guest room's made up. He shook his head. Jessica tracks my phone. She worries when I don't come home. Another yawn. She's just protective. After he left, weaving slightly as he walked to his car, I called Margaret immediately. We need that tea analyzed. He left the thermos here. Don't touch it, she said quickly. I'll send my forensics contact. Chain of custody matters. The next morning, results came back. The tea contained enough sedatives to drop a horse. Not enough to be dangerous, Margaret explained, but enough to create dependence and ensure compliance. David was furious when we briefed him. This changes everything. We're not just dealing with fraud now. This is assault, false imprisonment, potentially attempted murder, if she's been increasing the doses. But our breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Emma called me, her voice shaking with anger. Dad, you need to hear this. I ran into Jessica's cousin at the courthouse. She's a paralegal, not a lawyer like Jessica claimed. And she told me something interesting after a few drinks. What? The pregnancy's fake. She laughed about it, said Jessica's always been dramatic. Apparently the whole family's in on it, planning to claim miscarriage right before the trial to gain sympathy. Emma, would she testify to that? Already got her contact info. She's tired of being used by Jessica and wants out. Emma paused. Dad, there's something else. She said Jessica's done this before, twice. Different states, different names, same con. I hung up, feeling a mixture of rage and relief. We were building our case brick by brick. But the most damning evidence came from Harold Whitman himself. He approached me at the hardware store, cornering me in the lumber aisle. This time, I was ready, my phone recording in my chest pocket. "Last chance, Peterson," he said without preamble. 200 grand or things get ugly. I've got a judge in my pocket who'll make sure you lose everything. "Which judge?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. He smiled coldly. "Wouldn't you like to know? Let's just say, your boy David Fitzgerald won't know what hit him. We've done this before, old man. We don't lose." "Is that a threat?" "It's a promise. Pay up or lose your son and your money. Your choice." After he left, I sent the recording to David, who immediately contacted the state's attorney. "This is extortion, clear and simple. And the threat about a judge, that's conspiracy." That night, I sat in my workshop, staring at the half-finished dresser. Tomorrow, Margaret would deliver her final report. We'd have enough evidence to destroy Jessica's case and possibly send her to prison. But would we have enough to save Brad? My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number: "Stop digging, or Brad has an accident." I screenshotted it and forwarded to Margaret and David. The response was immediate. Margaret called, "They're getting desperate." "That's good. Desperate people make mistakes." "What if they hurt Brad?" "They won't. He's their meal ticket. Without him, the lawsuit falls apart." She paused. "Ron, we're close. Carl gave me names of their previous victims. 2 families broken, but the third fought back and won. I'm meeting with them tomorrow." I thought about Martha, how she'd have handled this. She always said I was too patient, too willing to let things play out. But patience was a virtue in construction. You measured twice, cut once. You made sure your foundation was solid before building. Jessica Whitman thought she was playing chess while I was playing checkers. She was about to learn that in construction we play a longer game. We build things to last, and we know how to demolish when necessary. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. Tonight, I prayed for my son and prepared for war. David Fitzgerald's conference room had transformed into a war room. Boxes of evidence lined the walls, depositions stacked neatly on the mahogany table, and a presentation screen showed Jessica's financial web in damning detail. Margaret Stone stood at the whiteboard, connecting dots with the precision of her FBI training. "Gentlemen," David began, his voice carrying the authority of 4 decades in law, "we're not just defending anymore. We're going on offense." I studied the faces around the table. Besides David and Margaret, we'd brought in Gary Chen, a forensic accountant, who'd traced Jessica's money trails, and Sarah Martinez from the state's attorney's office, who'd taken special interest in the extortion angle. "Let's review what we have." David continued, pulling up documents on his laptop. Fraud, both financial and identity. Extortion courtesy of Harold's recorded threats. Drugging without consent, a felony. Conspiracy to commit fraud across state lines, making this potentially federal. Sarah Martinez leaned forward. "The federal angle is strong. With victims in multiple states and evidence of an organized scheme, the FBI's white-collar crime division is interested." But the bombshell came from Margaret. "I met with Carl Kowalski again yesterday. He's willing to testify in exchange for a sentence reduction. He has documents Jessica thought were destroyed, including her handwritten notes about targeting wealthy families." "Will his testimony hold up?" I asked. "He's a convicted felon." "Normally, that would be an issue," David acknowledged. "But we have corroborating evidence for everything he'll say. Plus, I've just received this." He slid a document across the table. Medical confirmation that Jessica is not and has never been pregnant. Her own doctor confirmed she's been requesting documentation for a pregnancy that doesn't exist. My hands clenched. The cruelty of faking a grandchild still struck deep. "How do we proceed?" David smiled, but it was the smile of a predator. "We file our countersuit tomorrow. But tonight, We have dinner theater to attend. I looked at him confused. What? Margaret explained. Jessica's throwing a baby shower this weekend. Invited half the town, including Emma. She's planning to solidify her pregnancy story publicly before the trial. And we'll be ready. Emma's wearing a wire. It's perfectly legal. She's a party to the conversation. We expect Jessica to make admissions thinking she's among friends. The preparation for our counterstrike consumed the next 3 days. We filed a devastating lawsuit naming Jessica, Harold, and Patricia as defendants. Fraud, extortion, conspiracy, intentional infliction of emotional distress, defamation, and drugging without consent. We sought damages of $2 million and included a request for an emergency restraining order, preventing them from disposing of assets. The baby shower arrived on a sunny Saturday. Emma later described it as surreal. Jessica, wearing a prosthetic belly that looked convincing under her flowing dress, held court among 40 guests. Gifts piled high, including handmade blankets from elderly neighbors who'd known Brad since childhood. The wire captured everything. Poor Ron. Jessica's voice cooed with false sympathy. He's so stingy with his money. Brad and I just wanted security for our baby. Is that so wrong? Patricia chimed in. Some people forget what family means. Thank goodness the law protects expectant mothers. Then came the crucial moment. Jessica's cousin Diane, the paralegal, who'd been growing increasingly uncomfortable with the scheme, asked pointed questions. Jessica, have you picked a hospital yet? My friend's an obstetrics nurse at General. She could give you a tour. Jessica's response was telling. Oh, we're still deciding. Maybe home birth. Hospitals make me nervous. But you'll need medical records for the insurance. When's your next ultrasound? A pause. Soon. Very soon. Emma, playing her role perfectly, mentioned how excited I was to be a grandfather despite the lawsuit. Jessica's response was venomous. He'll see this baby when he pays what he owes. Not before. I know how to hurt him where it counts. Margaret listened to the recording that evening, smiling grimly. She just admitted to using a fake pregnancy as leverage. That's extortion. But the real victory came from an unexpected source. Monday morning, a woman named Deborah Richardson called David's office. She'd been one of Patricia and Jessica's victims in Michigan 8 years ago. I heard they were at it again, she said over speakerphone. They destroyed my family. Took my father-in-law for $500,000 before we caught on. I'll testify. I kept everything. Her story was chillingly familiar. Son married Jessica's sister, according to the con. Pressure for money started immediately. When they resisted a lawsuit claiming elder abuse, they'd settled to make it go away, but Deborah had secretly recorded conversations and kept documents. David was ecstatic. This establishes a pattern of behavior. No jury will see this as an isolated incident. The counter-lawsuit hit Jessica's camp like a tsunami. Their lawyer, Thomas Brennan, called David within hours of service. His voice strained. David, surely we can discuss this reasonably. My client tried reasonable. Your clients chose extortion instead. The pregnancy complications alone. What pregnancy? David's voice was steel. We have medical confirmation she's not pregnant. Would you like to see the receipt for the prosthetic belly she purchased? The line went silent. Then, I need to consult with my clients. That consultation resulted in chaos. Harold showed up at my house that night, no longer bothering with pretense. I was ready, camera rolling David, and a private security guard waiting in the next room. You've destroyed everything, he shouted, pounding on my door. 40 years of work gone because you couldn't just pay. I opened the door, but kept the security chain on. Harold, you're violating the restraining order. Screw your restraining order, Patricia's having a breakdown. Jessica's talking about leaving the country. You think you've won, I'll destroy you first. The security guard stepped into view, hand on his radio. Sir, I'm calling the police. Harold's face went from red to white. He stumbled back, then turned and ran to his car. The entire incident was captured on multiple cameras. David filed for his immediate arrest that night. By morning, Harold was in custody for violating the restraining order and making threats. Patricia, attempting to visit him, was arrested on the outstanding warrant for conspiracy and fraud. The house of cards was collapsing, but Jessica made one last desperate play. She called Brad from a burner phone, Margaret's surveillance catching the call. "Baby, your father's trying to destroy us. The stress? I think I'm losing the baby. You need to come home now. We need to leave, tonight. I have tickets to Costa Rica." That's when Brad did something unexpected. He drove not home, but to my house. I found him on my porch at midnight, thermos of tea, untouched, eyes clearer than I'd seen in months. "Dad," he said simply, "I need help." I pulled him inside, called David despite the hour. "Brad's here. He wants out. Put him on speaker." Brad's story poured out. He'd been suspicious for weeks. The tea made him feel wrong. The pregnancy timeline didn't add up. He'd found the receipt for the prosthetic belly in Jessica's car, but convinced himself he was paranoid. "Tonight she wants us to flee the country. Dad, I think I married a con artist." David's voice was gentle but urgent. "Brad, we need you to go home and act normal. Can you do that? We need one more day to finalize everything. The lawsuit can be withdrawn. You're as much a victim as your father. But Brad, tomorrow at the courthouse, we need you to choose. Your father or Jessica. There's no middle ground anymore." Brad looked at me, tears in his eyes. "I'm sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry." I pulled my son into the first hug we'd shared in 2 years. "We'll fix this, son. Together." He went home that night to play the role of his life. Jessica, panicking, had already started packing. She told him her mother had been falsely arrested, that my vendetta was destroying their family. Brad played along, helping her pack, while secretly documenting everything with his phone. The next morning, federal agents arrived at their house with warrants. Jessica, still wearing her prosthetic belly, was arrested on federal fraud charges. The image of her being handcuffed while fake pregnant would later become evidence exhibit number 47. Brad's cooperation was complete. He provided passwords, documents, recordings. The sedatives in his system were confirmed by blood tests. His genuine shock at learning about Jessica's past life as Jennifer Kowalski was painful to witness. 4 years, he kept saying. 4 years of my life with a stranger. As Jessica was led away, she turned to Brad with pure hatred. "You're just like your father. Weak. Pathetic. You deserve everything coming to you." But her threats were empty. We had won the first battle, but the war would be decided in court. And thanks to our preparation, we held all the cards. That night, Brad slept in his childhood room for the first time in years. I heard him crying through the walls, grieving for a wife who never existed and a child who was never real. But beneath the grief, I heard something else, the sound of my son coming back to himself. The real fight was about to begin in the courthouse. But for tonight, I had my son back. Everything else could wait until morning. The courthouse steps seemed steeper than I remembered as I climbed them on that crisp Tuesday morning. Media vans lined the street, drawn by the sensational nature of the case. Elderly father sued by son for $800,000 fake pregnancy, federal fraud charges. David had warned me it would be a circus, but seeing reporters thrust microphones at Brad as he arrived separately still jarred me. Judge Catherine Hammond presided, a woman known for her sharp intellect and zero tolerance for courtroom theatrics. At 72, she'd seen every scam and scheme imaginable. David considered her assignment to our case a gift from the legal gods. The courtroom was packed. Emma sat directly behind me, her presence a steady comfort. Brad was positioned with the prosecution, having agreed to testify against Jessica in exchange for immunity. Across the aisle, Jessica sat in a conservative suit, her fake pregnancy belly conspicuously absent. Her lawyer, Thomas Brennan, looked like he'd aged a decade in the past week. "All rise," the bailiff announced, and Judge Hammond entered her black robes, a stark reminder of the serious nature of justice. The state's attorney, Sarah Martinez, opened with devastating precision. "Your Honor, We will show that the defendants engaged in a systematic scheme to defraud Ronald Peterson of $800,000 through manipulation, false pretenses, and criminal conspiracy. This was not a family dispute. This was organized crime targeting the elderly. Brennan's opening was notably subdued. He spoke of misunderstandings, family tensions, and his client's desire for security. Even he seemed unconvinced by his own words. Sarah called her first witness, Margaret Stone. Margaret's testimony was clinical devastating. She presented the paper trail, the falsified documents, the money transfers. Each exhibit was entered into evidence with mechanical precision. Ms. Stone. Sarah asked, "What did your investigation reveal about Jessica Whitman's identity?" Jessica Whitman is actually Jennifer Kowalski. She legally changed her name 6 years ago after testifying against her then-husband in a federal fraud case. She used her immunity deal to disappear and start fresh in Illinois. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Jessica's face remained impassive, but I caught her hands clenching in her lap. And the pregnancy? Margaret held up the receipt. Purchased from Stagecraft Studios. Model B40, the second trimester special. $439 plus tax. The cross-examination was brief. Brennan tried to suggest Margaret's investigation was biased, that she'd been paid to find dirt. Margaret's response was cutting. "I was paid to find the truth. The truth happened to be dirty." Next came the forensic accountant, Gary Chen. His testimony about the money transfers was dry, but damning. $47,000 systematically stolen, hidden in a web of fake transactions. "The sophistication suggests experience," he testified. This wasn't a first attempt. Then came the emotional highlight, Deborah Richardson, flown in from Michigan. Her testimony about how Patricia and Jessica had destroyed her family 8 years ago had several jurors wiping their eyes. "They targeted us because my father-in-law had dementia," she said quietly. "They convinced my brother-in-law that his father was abusing him financially. By the time we proved it was lies, Dad had lost his will to live. He died thinking his son hated him." Jessica showed emotion for the first time, whispering furiously to her lawyer. Brennan objected repeatedly, but Judge Hammond allowed the testimony as evidence of pattern behavior. The first day ended with Harold's extortion attempts playing on the courtroom speakers. His voice, threatening judges and promising to destroy me, echoed off the marble walls. Harold himself sat in orange jail clothes, having been denied bail as a flight risk. That evening, Brad came to my house. We didn't talk about the trial. Instead, we worked together on the antique dresser, sanding in companionable silence. It was the most peace either of us had felt in years. Day 2 brought Brad to the witness stand. My son looked fragile, but determined. Sarah's questioning was gentle, but thorough. "Mr. Peterson, how did you meet your wife?" "At a bar. She approached me. Said I looked like someone who deserved better than drinking alone." His voice cracked. "I thought it was romantic. Now I know she'd researched me, knew about Dad's business." He described the gradual isolation, how Jessica had slowly turned him against me. The tea came up, and Brad's testimony about his growing dependence on it, his foggy memories, his inability to think clearly, had several jurors shaking their heads. "When did you realize something was wrong?" "When I found the receipt for the fake belly. Even then, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe she was planning a costume party. The mind does crazy things when your world's falling apart." Brennan's cross-examination was harsh. "Isn't it true you're testifying against your wife to save yourself?" Brad's answer was simple. "I'm testifying because she was never really my wife. You can't be married to someone who doesn't exist." The prosecution then played the baby shower recording. Jessica's voice talking about hurting me, where it counted, using the fake baby as leverage, echoed through the courtroom. Several jurors looked disgusted. Patricia was brought in under guard for her testimony, but she refused to speak, invoking her Fifth Amendment rights. Her silence spoke volumes. Then came the moment of highest drama. Sarah called Jessica to the stand. She had to testify, her lawyer explained, to counter the overwhelming evidence. Jessica walked to the witness box with practiced grace, the picture of wounded innocence. "Mrs. Whitman, are you pregnant?" "I was." Jessica's voice was soft, tremulous. "I lost the baby due to the stress of this persecution." Sarah's smile was sharp. "When did this miscarriage occur?" "Last week." "Which hospital treated you?" A pause. "I handled it at home. Without medical care, despite the alleged complications you cited in your lawsuit." Jessica's composure cracked slightly. "It was traumatic. I don't remember all the details." Sarah introduced medical records. "These show you visited Dr. Amanda Foster 2 days before announcing your pregnancy, not for prenatal care, but for fertility consultation. You were seeking treatment because you couldn't conceive." "That's not. I was confirming the pregnancy." "With a fertility specialist, not an obstetrician." The questioning grew more intense. Sarah produced the credit card receipt for the prosthetic belly, the emails between Jessica and her mother, planning the scheme, Carl's testimony via video link from prison. Jessica's mask finally slipped completely. "You don't understand. Ron has millions. Brad deserved that money. I deserve security." "So you admit to lying about the pregnancy?" "I admit to nothing. This is a witch hunt." Judge Hammond had to gavel for order, as Jessica grew increasingly agitated. The final blow came when Sarah introduced evidence of Jessica's previous victims, complete with photos of the families she'd destroyed. "These people trusted you, just like the Peterson family trusted you." Jessica's response was chilling. "Trust is for fools. Brad was easy to manipulate. His father should have just paid. This is all Ron's fault." The redirect by her own lawyer was painful to watch. Brennan tried to salvage something, painting Jessica as a woman desperate for security. But the damage was done. Closing arguments were scheduled for the next morning, but that evening brought one last surprise. Diana, Jessica's paralegal cousin, contacted David. She had one more recording made at a family dinner 2 months ago. On the tape, Jessica, Harold, and Patricia discussed their plan in detail. Jessica laughed about Brad being dumber than a box of rocks, and how easy it was to control him with the tea. Harold mentioned their previous scores, tallying nearly $2 million over the years. Patricia, the clear mastermind, outlined how they'd flee to Costa Rica once they had my money. "Always leave them broken," Patricia said on the tape. "Emotionally and financially. They're less likely to pursue if they're destroyed." David immediately filed to introduce the recording as evidence. Judge Hammond, reviewing it in chambers, looked physically ill. She allowed it. The next morning, Jessica didn't show up. Her lawyer reported she'd attempted to flee, but was caught at the airport with a ticket to Mexico, in violation of her bail conditions. She was remanded to custody. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. Jessica was sentenced to 8 years federal prison. Patricia received 12 years as the mastermind. Harold got 5 years for extortion and conspiracy. As they were led away, Jessica turned to Brad one last time. "You'll never find anyone like me again." Brad's response was quiet but firm. Thank God for that. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. But I had eyes only for my son, who looked like he'd aged years in the past months, but also somehow looked younger, freed from the burden of lies. "Dad," he said simply, "can we go home?" We drove back to my house in silence. But it was a comfortable silence. The war was won, but the rebuilding would take time. Trust once broken wasn't easily restored. But we had time now. Time Jessica had tried to steal, but failed. That night, Emma joined us for dinner. We didn't talk about the trial, or the money, or the betrayals. Instead, we talked about Martha sharing memories that made us laugh and cry. For the first time in years, we felt like a family again. The antique dresser sat finished in my workshop, its surface gleaming. I'd completed it during the trial, needing something solid to focus on. Now, it would go to Emma's daughter, my real grandchild, not the phantom Jessica had used as a weapon. As I lay in bed that night, I thought about Judge Hammond's question during my testimony. Mr. Peterson, knowing everything now, What would you have done differently? My answer remained the same. I would have trusted my instincts sooner, but I wouldn't change trying to protect my family, even from themselves. The truth had set us free, but freedom I was learning was just the beginning of healing. The morning after the verdict, Judge Hammond reconvened court for an emergency session. Jessica's attempted flight had triggered additional charges, but more importantly, new evidence had surfaced overnight that would crack the case wide open like a sledgehammer through glass. I arrived to find the courthouse buzzing with federal agents. David met me at the security checkpoint, his expression mixing satisfaction with concern. Ron, the FBI raided Patricia's storage unit based on information from Jessica's cousin. What they found? He shook his head. This is bigger than we imagined. Inside the courtroom, Jessica sat shackled, her carefully constructed appearance finally abandoned. Her hair hung limp, makeup smeared from a night in federal custody. The designer clothes had been replaced with orange jail scrubs. For the first time, she looked like what she was, a common criminal caught in her own web. Judge Hammond entered with steel in her spine. Ms. Kowalski. She began using Jessica's real name deliberately. Before we proceed with additional charges, you're required to undergo medical examination to verify your claims of pregnancy and miscarriage. Court officers will escort you. Jessica exploded. This is harassment. I know my rights. Your rights include the court's ability to verify medical claims made under oath. Judge Hammond responded coldly. Officers, proceed. As Jessica was led out screaming about violation and persecution, Sarah Martinez addressed the court. Your Honor, while we await medical confirmation, I'd like to present evidence recovered from Patricia Whitman's storage unit. What followed was a masterclass in exposing criminal enterprise. Box after box of documents revealed a 15-year pattern of elderly fraud across 5 states. Fake identities, forged documents, detailed notes on victims' weaknesses. Patricia had kept trophies of her conquests, like a serial killer keeping mementos. This ledger, Sarah held up a leather-bound book, contains names, amounts stolen, and personal notes about each victim. Ronald Peterson was listed as Project Grandfather Clock, with an expected take of $1.2 million. The gallery gasped. Brad, sitting with me now instead of with the prosecution, gripped my shoulder. His hand trembled, but his jaw was set with determination. Margaret Stone returned to the stand to explain the scope. We've identified 17 families targeted over 15 years. Total stolen approximately $4.7 million. 3 elderly victims died during or shortly after the schemes, possibly from stress-induced complications. An hour later, court officers returned with the medical examiner. His testimony was brief and damning. Physical examination confirms Ms. Kowalski has never been pregnant. No evidence of recent miscarriage. No scarring consistent with pregnancy. The defendant's claims are medically impossible. Jessica's lawyer, Thomas Brennan, stood to object, but seemed to deflate midway. He sat back down without speaking, the fight gone from him. That's when Harold Whitman, perhaps seeing his empire crumbling, made a desperate play. I want to make a deal, he shouted from the defendant's table. I have information, Jessica and Patricia, they've done worse things. Much worse. Judge Hammond gavelled for order. Mr. Whitman, you'll have opportunity to speak through proper channels. But Harold was beyond caring. There's a body in Michigan. Patricia's first husband didn't die of a heart attack. She poisoned him for insurance money. The courtroom erupted. Judge Hammond cleared the gallery except for immediate family and press. Federal agents surrounded Harold as he spilled 15 years of secrets, each more damning than the last. Jessica turned on him like a rabid animal. Shut up, you pathetic fool! But Harold, facing decades in prison, held nothing back. He revealed offshore accounts, additional fake identities, and a network of accomplices across multiple states. He named names, dates, places, speaking so fast, the court reporter struggled to keep up. The most shocking revelation came when Harold pointed at Patricia. Tell them about Seattle. Tell them about the Andersons. Patricia, who'd maintained stoic silence throughout the trial, finally cracked. You swore you'd never tell. That was before you got us caught, Harold shot back. Sarah Martinez quickly intervened. Your Honor, given these developments, we request immediate separation of defendants and individual representation. What emerged over the next 2 hours was a family destroying itself from within. Jessica blamed Patricia for forcing her into the life. Patricia accused Jessica of being sloppy of choosing Brad Peterson, despite warnings he was too close to his father. Harold revealed Jessica had been skimming from their takes, hiding money even from her mother. She has the account in the Caymans, with $800,000, Harold shouted. Money she stole from our other jobs. Jessica lunged across the defendant's table, clawing at Harold before guards restrained her. I earned that money. You contributed nothing. Brad watched his wife's complete unraveling, with a mixture of horror and relief. The woman he'd loved never existed. This creature of rage and greed was the reality beneath the mask. Judge Hammond, maintaining control despite the chaos, made a decisive ruling. Given the scope of criminal activity revealed, I'm referring this entire matter to federal authorities for RICO prosecution. This is no longer simple fraud. This is organized crime. Emma, who'd been documenting everything in a notebook, leaned over to whisper, Dad, Brad's free of her. Really free. But the day's revelations weren't over. Diana, Jessica's cousin, was called to testify under immunity agreement. Her testimony provided the final nails in Jessica's coffin. Jessica kept journals. Diana revealed producing a thumb drive. Encrypted files where she documented everything. She called it her insurance policy against Patricia. The files were displayed on courtroom monitors. Jessica's own words describing how she'd identified Brad at a financial conference, researched his family, crafted her persona to appeal to him. She'd written about the sedatives with clinical detachment, noting dosages and effects like a scientist experimenting on lab rats. One entry stood out. B's father has approximately $12 million in assets. Stubborn, but loves his son. Classic manipulation target. 3-year timeline to extract maximum value. Note, must maintain pregnancy fiction until money secured. Brad left the courtroom, then Emma following to comfort him. I wanted to go too, but David held me back. Let Emma handle it. You need to see this through. The medical examination results triggered an immediate contempt charge for Jessica. Judge Hammond's patience had evaporated. Ms. Kowalski, you've perjured yourself, repeatedly fabricated evidence, and attempted to perpetrate fraud upon this court. Your contempt for justice is matched only by your cruelty to those who trusted you. Jessica's response was to laugh. Actually laugh. Justice. You want to talk about justice? Where's the justice in Ron Peterson, hoarding millions while others struggle? I took what should have been ours. The money was never yours, Judge Hammond responded. Mr. Peterson earned his wealth through decades of honest work. You attempted to steal it through lies and manipulation. That's not justice. That's theft. The FBI agent in charge, Special Agent Michael Torres, addressed the court. Your Honor, we're prepared to file federal charges, including racketeering money, laundering wire fraud across state lines, and conspiracy to commit murder based on new evidence regarding Patricia Whitman's first husband. Patricia fainted, actually collapsed in her chair. As medical personnel attended to her, Jessica made one last desperate play. Brad knew, she screamed. He knew everything. Check his emails. He helped plan it all. It was her final lie, and the most easily disproven. Brad's devices, already in FBI custody, showed only his growing confusion and fear over the past months. His searches included wife acting strange, memory problems from stress, and heartbreakingly, how to know if spouse loves you. Sarah Martinez's closing statement was brief, but powerful. Your Honor, we've seen today not just the unraveling of a criminal conspiracy, but the complete moral bankruptcy of people who prey on family bonds for profit. Ronald Peterson's only crime was loving his son enough to stand up to extortion. His courage exposed a criminal enterprise that might have continued claiming victims for years. Judge Hammond's final words before remanding all three defendants to federal custody were memorable. In 37 years on the bench, I've rarely seen such calculated cruelty. You didn't just try to steal money. You tried to steal a man's family, his trust in his son, his hope for grandchildren. You weaponized love itself. Society has no place for predators who feast on family bonds. As the defendants were led away in shackles, Jessica turned one last time. But instead of looking at Brad or me, she looked at her mother. "This is all your fault. You made me this way." Patricia's response was barely audible. "I made you smart. You made yourself cruel." Outside the courthouse, the media frenzy was overwhelming. But I found Brad and Emma in my truck waiting. Brad had been crying, but seemed clearer than I'd seen him in years. "Dad," he said, "I need help. Real help. Therapy, maybe rehab for whatever she was giving me. I want to get better. We'll get through this together." I promised. And for the first time in years, I believed it. The drive home was quiet, each of us processing the day's revelations. The woman Brad had married was facing life in federal prison. Her parents faced similar sentences. The money they'd stolen would be recovered and returned to victims. But more importantly, my son was free. Damaged, certainly. Hurting, absolutely. But free to heal, to rebuild, to become himself again. That night, Emma stayed for dinner again. We ordered pizza, too emotionally drained to cook. As we sat around my kitchen table, the same table where Jessica had dropped those mortgage documents, what felt like a lifetime ago, Brad spoke quietly. "I'm going to sell everything she touched. The house, the car, everything. Start completely fresh." "That's your choice," I said carefully. "But don't rush. Take time to heal first." He nodded, then looked at me directly. "Dad, that judge asked you what you'd do differently. You said you'd trust your instincts sooner. My instincts told me something was wrong for months. Why didn't I listen?" Emma reached for his hand. "Because you loved her. Or who you thought she was. Love makes us vulnerable." "It shouldn't make us stupid," Brad said bitterly. "You weren't stupid," I said firmly. "You were targeted by professional criminals. They've been perfecting this for 15 years. You survived. That makes you strong, not stupid." We talked late into the night, beginning the long process of rebuilding trust and healing wounds. The financial recovery would be straightforward. The emotional recovery would take years. But we had time now. Time that Jessica and her family had tried to steal, but failed to take. Time to rebuild, to heal, to become a family again. The antique dresser stood in the corner, finally restored. Tomorrow, we'd deliver it to Emma's daughter. A gift from grandfather to grandchild, honest and real. No lies, no manipulation, just love expressed through patient craftsmanship. It was a small thing, but it was a beginning. 6 months had passed since the trial that changed everything. The October morning was crisp, as I stood in my workshop, running my hand over a new project, a dining table commissioned by the Riverside Community Center. The wood was solid oak, honest and true, nothing hidden or false about it. Brad knocked on the workshop door, a courtesy he'd adopted since moving back home temporarily. He entered carrying 2 cups of coffee, real coffee, not the sedative-laced tea that had clouded his mind for so long. "Morning, Dad," he said, his voice clear and strong. The therapy and medical treatment had worked wonders. The neurologist confirmed that while prolonged sedative exposure had caused some temporary damage, Brad's cognitive functions were fully recovering. "Judge Hammond wants to see us today." He continued, setting down my coffee. "Her office called. Something about the final disposition of the case." We drove to the courthouse together, no longer the broken father and son who'd entered these halls months ago. The media circus had died down after Jessica, Patricia, and Harold had all pled guilty in federal court to avoid trial on the murder charge related to Patricia's first husband. Jessica received 12 years in federal prison. Patricia, as the mastermind with potential murder charges, got 25 to life. Harold, who'd cooperated, fully received 7 years, but would likely serve 4 with good behavior. Judge Hammond's chambers were warm and filled with photos of grandchildren. She greeted us with genuine warmth, a far cry from the stern figure who'd presided over the chaos of the trial. "Gentlemen, please sit," she said, gesturing to comfortable chairs. "I wanted to meet with you personally to discuss some developments." She pulled out a thick folder. "The Federal Asset Recovery Team has finished its work. Ron Brad, I'm pleased to inform you that approximately $3.2 million has been recovered from various accounts. The FBI is distributing these funds to all identified victims." "What about the other families?" I asked. The 17 families Harold had identified haunted me. "Each will receive compensation. Not full restitution, sadly, but substantial amounts." She smiled. "Your recording of Harold's extortion attempt was crucial. It broke the case wide open." She turned to Brad. "Mr. Peterson, I also wanted to inform you that your divorce has been finalized. Since the marriage was entered into under fraudulent pretenses, with one party using a false identity, it's been annulled. Legally, it never existed." Brad's shoulders relaxed visibly. The symbolic erasure of the marriage mattered more than any financial settlement. "There's one more thing," Judge Hammond said, her expression growing serious. "During my career, I've presided over thousands of cases. Family disputes are always the hardest, especially when they involve betrayal of trust. But I've rarely seen a family show such strength in the face of systematic cruelty." She looked at me directly. "Mr. Peterson, you asked what I would have done differently. I've thought about that question often. The truth is, you did exactly what a father should do. You protected your family even when it meant protecting your son from himself. Then came the moment that would stay with me forever." Judge Hammond asked the question that had haunted the trial. "Mr. Peterson, knowing everything now, what would you have done differently?" I thought carefully before answering. "Your Honor, I've asked myself that every day. I would have trusted my instincts sooner, yes. But I wouldn't change fighting for my son. Love sometimes means saying no. Love sometimes means letting someone fall so they can learn to stand. Love sometimes means being the villain in their story until they can see the truth." Judge Hammond nodded slowly. "Wisdom earned through pain is still wisdom, Mr. Peterson. Use it well." As we left her chambers, Brad stopped in the courthouse hallway. "Dad, I need to tell you something. I've been accepted to graduate school, MBA program focusing on forensic accounting. I want to help prevent what happened to us from happening to others." Pride swelled in my chest. "That's wonderful, son." "There's more," he said, a shy smile crossing his face. "Remember Grace, the nurse from the therapy center? We've been having coffee. Just coffee," he added quickly. "My therapist says I need to go slow, but she's real, Dad. Honest. Her daughter Sophie is 7, loves building things. I told her about your workshop. Bring them by sometime," I said carefully, "when you're ready." A year later, the workshop had become a familiar place for Sophie. She'd stand on a step stool, safety goggles comically large on her small face, helping me sand wood, while Brad and Grace talked quietly on the porch. Their relationship had developed slowly, built on honesty and mutual respect, rather than manipulation and lies. The FBI investigation had expanded nationwide, uncovering similar schemes in 7 states. Jessica's journals, decoded by federal analysts, had provided a roadmap to dozens of victims. Some families like ours found closure. Others discovered betrayals they'd never suspected. Emma had written a series of articles about elder fraud for the Washington Post, winning a journalism award for investigative reporting. She dedicated the series to Martha's memory and to all the fathers who stand firm when the world tells them to bend. Brad graduated with his MBA, immediately finding work with a firm specializing in fraud prevention. His experience, painful as it was, made him uniquely qualified to spot the signs others missed. On a spring afternoon 2 years after the trial, our family gathered for Emma's daughter's birthday. The antique dresser stood in her room filled with treasures only a 9-year-old could value. Brad arrived with Grace and Sophie, who immediately ran to the workshop to show me her latest creation from shop class. As I watched my son help Grace set up party decorations, I marveled at the journey. The Brad who dropped mortgage papers on my table seemed like a different person. This Brad was present clear-eyed, building something real with someone who valued truth over manipulation. Grace approached me later, while Brad pushed Sophie on the swing. Martha and I had hung 30 years ago. Mr. Peterson Brad told me everything, all of it. I wanted to thank you. For what? For saving him, for being strong enough to let him fall, and wise enough to catch him when it mattered. She watched Brad with soft eyes. He's a good man, hurt but healing, real in a way that matters. That evening, as the party wound down, Harold Whitman appeared in the news. He'd been released early for good behavior and cooperation. The reporter mentioned he'd found work as a janitor at a community center in Chicago, court-ordered community service becoming his new life. "Do you forgive them?" Brad asked, seeing the news report. I considered the question. Harold was weak, not evil. Patricia was evil, but broken. Jessica. I paused. Jessica was both victim and victimizer. I don't forgive the harm they caused. But I don't carry hatred either. That would give them power they don't deserve. 3 years after that courthouse meeting with Judge Hammond, life had found its rhythm. Brad and Grace married in a small ceremony in my backyard. Sophie, now 10, served as flower girl, scattering petals with the same precision she used in the workshop. Brad's work had helped recover millions in fraud schemes. He'd testified before Congress about elder fraud, using our story to push for stronger protections. He never mentioned Jessica by name, referring only to criminal enterprises that weaponize family bonds. Emma's book about our experience became a bestseller, donated to elder care facilities nationwide. She'd captured not just the crime, but the recovery, the slow rebuilding of trust between father and son. I still worked in my shop, though, now with a young apprentice. Sophie had declared her intention to take over Peterson Construction someday. At 10, she was already better with measurements than Brad had ever been. On quiet evenings, I'd sit in Martha's chair looking at our family photos. The gallery now included Brad and Grace's wedding, Sophie's adoption papers, making her legally Brad's daughter, Emma's journalism awards, and a photo from Judge Hammond's retirement party, where she'd asked us to attend. The $800,000 lawsuit felt like a lifetime ago. The money recovered from federal asset forfeiture had been donated to a fund for elder fraud victims. I didn't need blood money to feel whole. I had my family back. One last scene stays with me. Last month, a young couple contacted Brad's firm suspecting the wife's parents were running a similar scheme. Brad took the case pro bono, his expertise helping them escape before real damage was done. The wife, crying in Brad's office, asked how he knew so much about these schemes. "Personal experience," he'd said simply. "Sometimes the worst things that happen to us become the tools to help others." He called me that night, voice thick with emotion. "Dad, we stopped one. We actually stopped one before they could destroy the family." "You did good, son." "We did good, Dad. If you hadn't stood firm, if you just paid them off, they'd still be out there hurting people." As I write this, looking out my workshop window, I see Brad teaching Sophie to use a level on the treehouse they're building for Grace's expected baby. My real grandchild, conceived in love, born into truth, raised with the knowledge that family means protection, not predation. They wanted $800,000. What they gave me instead was priceless. My son backed my family stronger, and the knowledge that standing for what's right, even when you stand alone, is the only wealth that truly matters. Martha would be proud. In the end, that's all that counts. The workshop smells of fresh oak and possibilities. Sophie's laughter rings across the yard as Brad chases her with a measuring tape. Grace watches from the porch, hand on her growing belly, smile radiant with simple happiness. This is wealth. This is justice. This is love properly understood, not as weakness to exploit, but as strength that endures. The antique dresser, started it all, a restoration project that became a metaphor for our lives. You can't always prevent damage. Sometimes the wood splits, the finish cracks, the joints come loose. But with patience, skill, and love, you can create something beautiful from the broken pieces. That's the lesson I carry forward. We are all capable of restoration. Even those who seem lost can find their way back. It requires courage to sand away the false finish, to see the true grain beneath, to rebuild with honest materials. But the result is worth every moment of pain, every sleepless night, every tear shed in the workshop when I thought I'd lost my son forever. He wasn't lost. He was just temporarily hidden beneath layers of lies and manipulation. And like any good craftsman, I knew that beneath the false veneer lay solid wood worth saving. $800,000. Such a small price for such a profound education in what truly matters. As Martha used to say, the best investment you can make is in truth. It pays dividends across generations. She was right as always. And somewhere, I hope she's watching, seeing what we've built from the ashes of betrayal, a family stronger for having been tested, love deeper for having survived assault. This is our story. Not of victimhood, but of victory. Not of loss, but of finding what matters most. Not of ending, but of beginning again, wiser and more grateful for the simple gift of truth between father and son. The sun sets over my workshop, painting the sky in shades of gold and promise. Tomorrow, Sophie wants to learn dovetail joints. Brad's bringing blueprints for Grace's nursery furniture. Emma's coming by with her editor to discuss a second book about recovery and redemption. Life moves forward, built on a foundation of truth rather than lies. And that foundation, I've learned, can weather any storm. Dear viewers, family trust is sacred, but sometimes those closest to us can cause the deepest wounds. Have you ever faced a situation where you had to choose between enabling someone you love or standing firm for what's right? How did you handle it? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story touched your heart or reminded you of the importance of truth in family relationships, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories of courage and redemption. Share this with someone who might need to hear that standing up for yourself isn't selfish. Sometimes, it's the greatest act of love. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and remember, the truth might hurt initially, but it's the only foundation strong enough to rebuild trust. Wishing you strength and wisdom in all your relationships.